Module 3, Lesson 11, Absolute Value, Magnitude, and Distance. I can show and explain that the absolute value of a number is its distance from zero on the number line. I can use absolute value to find the magnitude of a positive or negative quantity in a real-world situation. Distance from zero is a measurement of how far. Magnitude is a measurement of how great or how big or how much. Find and record two different rational numbers that are the same distance from zero. Find as many examples as possible. So pause the video, take a couple of minutes, and look at this number line and find pairs of numbers that are the same distance from zero. All right. Starting with just the numbers on the number line, I have 1 and -1, 2 and -2, 3 and -3. Hopefully your brain is starting to scream at you, hey, these are pairs of opposite numbers. Remember the definition of opposite numbers, that they're on opposite sides of zero and they are the same distance from zero. So I have lots of pairs of opposite numbers on my number line. And I could keep writing out all the way to 10 and -10, and I could go for forever with these pairs of opposite numbers. However, there are some numbers that are not explicitly written on the number line. What about halfway between 1 and -1? I could have half and -half. What if I were to use a decimal? 5 and 1/10 and -5 and 1/10. -5 and 1/10 I drew, 5 and 1/10. So there are some pairs of numbers that are the same distance from zero. So what is the relationship between each pair of numbers? And I already kind of hinted this to you, but take a moment, pause, and think about this. The relationship between each pair of numbers, all of these pairs of numbers are the same distance from zero, and they are on opposite sides of zero. So they are opposite numbers. But in this lesson, what we're focused on is that they are the same distance from zero. How does each pair of numbers relate to zero? They are the same distance from zero. If you haven't figured out, that's a really important part of this lesson. Example 1, the absolute value of a number. The absolute value of 10 is written as these vertical bars with 10. So if I have the absolute value of 10, I would write it like that. On the number line, count the number of units from 10 to 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How many units is it from 10 to 0? It is 10, so I can say the absolute value of 10 is 10 units, or 10. What other number has an absolute value of 10? Well, opposite numbers are the same distance from zero. -10 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 units from zero. So -10 also has an absolute value of 10. -10 has an absolute value of 10. Why does it have an absolute value of 10? Because it is 10 units from zero. The absolute value of a number is the distance between the number and zero on the number line. Absolute value answers the question, how far? It does not answer the question, in what direction. If I have negative 10, I am saying that I am 10 units to the left of 0. If I have positive 10, I'm saying that I am 10 units to the right of 0. If I have absolute value, I'm just saying it's 10 units. I'm not saying what direction. It's just 10 units. Looking at exercise 1, we have the number -6. We need to find the absolute value, and we need to find a different number that has the same absolute value. And we will put this on the number line. I have -6, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units from 0. Going in the other direction, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The other number that has the same absolute value is 6. The absolute value of -6 is 6. The absolute value of 6 is 6. They are both 6 units from 0. Looking at 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The absolute value of 8 is 8. Continuing on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The absolute value of -8 is also 8. This number and this number, this -8, both have the same absolute value. They are both 8 units from 0. Looking at exercise 3. -1 is 1 unit from 0. The absolute value of -1 is 1. If I go 1 unit from 0, I am at 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. They are both 1 unit from 0. Example 2. Using absolute value to find magnitude. Mrs. Owens received a call from her bank because she had a checkbook balance of -$45. What was the magnitude of the amount overdrawn? Meaning, how big is the amount that is overdrawn? We don't say that the amount that she is overdrawn is -45. We say that she is 45 overdrawn. So this -45, that is a negative number for her account, but when we talk about the magnitude, we want the absolute value. How much is she overdrawn? She is overdrawn $45. Looking at a definition for magnitude. The magnitude of a measurement is the absolute value of its measure. When we measured her checking account, it was at -$45. The magnitude is the absolute value of that -$45. Make sure that you are solidifying these vocabulary concepts in your mind. They're very powerful and very important as we try to communicate mathematically. Exercise 4. For each scenario below, use absolute value to determine the magnitude of each quantity. Maria was sick with the flu, and her weight change as a result of it is represented by -4 pounds. How much weight did Maria lose? We wouldn't say that she lost -4 pounds. We would say that she lost 4 pounds. The magnitude, the quantity of the measure, it's a negative measurement. She lost weight. but the magnitude of this loss is the absolute value of -4, we would say that she lost 4 pounds. Exercise 5. For each scenario below, use absolute value to determine the magnitude of each quantity. Jeffrey owes his friend $5. How much is Jeffrey's debt? We have a situation where Jeffrey owes someone money, so that is a negative situation for Jeffrey. It's a -5. The magnitude is the absolute value of this -5. He owes his friend $5. We represent owing money as -5. To say how much he owes, we say he owes $5. He doesn't owe -5. He owes $5. The elevation of Niagara Falls, which is located between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, is 326 feet. How far is this above sea level? Well, it is 326 feet. That's a positive. It's above sea level. If we want to talk about the magnitude of this, we need the absolute value of 326. So the magnitude is 326. Exercise 7. How far below zero is -16 degrees Celsius? The integer that we would write is -16, but we don't say that we are -16 degrees below zero. What we would say is that we are 16 degrees below zero. We would use the absolute value to describe the magnitude. We aren't -16 below zero. We are 16 degrees below zero, which could be represented with a -16, or we can use the magnitude as part of our statement. Frank received a monthly statement for his college savings account. It listed a deposit of $100 as plus 100. It listed a withdrawal of $25 as negative 25. The statement showed an overall ending balance of $835.50. How much money did Frank add to his account that month? How much did he take out? What is the total amount Frank has saved for college? Go ahead and pause and think about that for a moment. These are questions of magnitude. He added $100. The magnitude of the amount added was 100. He withdrew $25, which is a -25. The magnitude of that amount is 25. He has a balance of $835.50. That's a positive for him. The magnitude, the measurement of how much that is $835.50. Meg is playing a card game with her friend Iona. The cards have positive and negative numbers printed on them. Meg exclaims, "The absolute value of the number on my card equals 8. What number is on Meg's card? Pause and think about that for a moment. Write your answer. Think about how you would explain that. Hopefully you said that there are two options. She could have a -8 because the absolute value of -8 is 8. She could have 8 on her card because the absolute value of 8 is 8. She has two possible cards. List a positive and negative number whose absolute value is greater than 3. Justify your answer using the number line. So I need a positive number and a negative number, and the value, absolute value, is greater than 3. Well, I could do -4. So I am constructing my number line. Absolute value is a measure of how far a number is from 0. -4 is 1, 2, 3, 4 units from 0. The absolute value of -4 is 4 units. That is an absolute value that is greater than 3. So I've taken care of a negative number. I could do a positive number. How about 7? If I count from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 is 7 units from 0, which means the absolute value of 7 is 7. An absolute value of 7 is greater than an absolute value of 3. Which of the following situations can be represented by the absolute value of 10? And we are going to put check marks next to each one that would represent 10. The temperature is 10 degrees below 0. Express this as an integer. As an integer, that would be a -10. Does -10 have an absolute value of 10? Yes, -10 has an absolute value of 10. However, this particular question is a little bit sneaky in that this question isn't really written for you to have an absolute value. The temperature 10 degrees below 0 is definitely an absolute value of 10, but then they add on this weird thing, express this as an integer. As soon as we say we have an integer, we no longer are talking about absolute value. We've moved away from magnitude. So although -10 degrees does have an absolute value of 10, this second part of this question kind of messes things up. Determining the size of Harold's debt, the magnitude of the debt. How big is a debt of $10? That is absolute value. We're looking at a magnitude. We're counting how far we are from 0. This first one, once again, isn't asking how far we are from 0. It's just saying, write it as -10. Determine how far -10 is from 0 on a number line. So here we have a better statement of that first item. How far is -10 from 0? That's an absolute value. 10 degrees is how many degrees above 0. Once again, we're counting how far are we from 0, so that is an absolute value. Julia used absolute value to find the distance between 0 and 6 on a number line. She then wrote a similar statement to represent the distance between 0 and -6. Below is her work. Is it correct? So do you agree with what Julia has written here? She has written that the absolute value of 6 is 6. I agree with that. She has written that the absolute value of -6 is -6. I do not agree with that statement. When we talk about absolute value, we're talking about distance from 0, not direction. -6 is 6 units from 0. What Julia should have written is the absolute value of -6 is 6. It is 6 units. We're just measuring how many units, not the direction. Use absolute value to represent the amount in dollars of a $238.25 profit. Profits are positive numbers, so we're getting direction here. When we write absolute value, we're talking about the magnitude of the profit. The distance from 0 is 238 and 25 hundredths. Judy lost 15 pounds. Use absolute value to represent the number of pounds Judy lost. So losing 15 pounds is a negative 15, but we wouldn't say that Judy lost negative 15 pounds. What we would say is that she lost 15 pounds. The situation is represented by the negative integer. However, if we're going to talk about how many pounds she lost, the magnitude, we would say that she lost 15, the absolute value of the negative 15. In math class, Carl and Angela are debating about integers and absolute value. Carl said 2 integers can have the same absolute value, and Angela said 1 integer can have 2 absolute values. Who is right? Defend your answer. Stop and think about the claims these two students are making. Carl is saying that there are 2 integers that will share an absolute value, and Angela is saying there is 1 integer that will have 2 absolute values. I'm not certain that it's possible for 1 integer to have 2 absolute values. If I am looking, for example, at the number 3, the distance from 0 to 3 is 3. That's all it is. It only has 1 absolute value. It isn't possible for it to have 2 absolute values. However, Carl's statement that there are 2 integers that will have the same absolute value, that I can believe, because negative 3 and 3 have the same absolute value. They're both 3 units from 0. So I think in this case that Carl is correct. There are 2 integers that have the same absolute value. I really don't see how 1 integer can be 2 different distances from 0. Jamie told his math teacher, "Give me any absolute value and I can tell you 2 numbers that have that absolute value." Is Jamie correct? For any given absolute value, will there always be 2 numbers that have that absolute value? Your brain is probably starting to think of examples. Well, I know that there's always opposite numbers, so I've got 1 and negative 1, 2 and negative 2, 5 and negative 5, 10 and negative 10, 200 and negative 200. So in your brain you're thinking, Jamie's on the right track here. If you give me an absolute value, I can give you 2 numbers that will have that absolute value. Here's the tricky part though. What about 0? What is the absolute value of 0? It's 0. Is there a positive 0 and a negative 0? And the answer to that question is no. So when the teacher says, give me a number that has, or give me 2 numbers that have an absolute value of 0, all you can give is 1 number. So although Jamie is doing some great thinking here, that in almost every single situation there will be 2 numbers that have the same absolute value, there is one exception to that, and it's 0. When we have an absolute value of 0, there is only 1 number that has that absolute value. And 0 isn't positive and it isn't negative, if you remember back a few lessons. Use a number line to show and explain why a number and its opposite have the same absolute value. Well, here is a positive 2 and here is a negative 2. These are opposite numbers. They are on opposite sides of 0 and they are both 2 units from 0. Because they are both 2 units from 0, they have the same absolute value. The absolute value of negative 2 is equal to the absolute value of 2. They both have an absolute value of 2. They are 2 units from 0. A bank teller assisted two customers with transactions. One customer made a $25 withdrawal from a savings account. I hear that as a taking of money out. That's a negative 25. The other customer made a $15 deposit. That's putting money in. That's a positive 15. Use absolute value to show the size of each transaction. So I need the absolute value of negative 25 to show that the magnitude of this transaction is 25. The absolute value of 15 to show that the magnitude of the transaction was 15. And the question is, which transaction involved more money? Well, 25 is greater than 15. This transaction has a greater magnitude, therefore it involved more money. So the transaction of taking $25 out of the savings account had a greater magnitude. Which is farther from 0? Negative 7 3/4 or positive 7 1/2. Use absolute value to defend your answer. If we are measuring farther from 0, I need to find the absolute value. And the absolute value of negative 7 3/4 is 7 3/4. And the absolute value of 7 1/2 is 7 1/2. Using the absolute value, I can determine that 7 3/4 has a greater magnitude. It is farther from 0. So I can say that negative 7 3/4 is farther from 0 than 7 1/2 because it has a larger absolute value, or a greater absolute value, a greater magnitude. I am thinking of two numbers. Both numbers have the same absolute value. What must be true about the two numbers? Pause and think about that for a moment. The numbers are opposites. They're on opposite sides of 0 and they are the same distance from 0. Can the absolute value of a number ever be a negative number? Why or why not? Pause and think about that for a moment. Can we have a negative absolute value? The answer is no, because absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. If you count the number of units from 0 to the number of units is its absolute value. You could be on the right side or on the left side of 0, but the number of units you count represents the distance, or the absolute value, and that will always be a positive number. When we use negatives and positives, we're talking about direction. What direction are we from 0? When we talk about absolute value, we talk about how far are we from 0. How can we use absolute value to determine magnitude? For instance, how far below 0 is negative 8 degrees? Absolute value represents the magnitude. That means how far are we from 0? That means that negative 8 degrees is 8 units below 0. The magnitude right here, 8 units below 0. Notice this is an absolute value telling us how far. This part right here tells us the direction. So here is the absolute value, and we've added on to that direction. And of course my smart panel is having a moment here. All right. So hopefully you feel like you can now show and explain that the absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on the number line. And hopefully you are feeling like you can use absolute value to find the magnitude of a positive or negative quantity in a real-world situation. That concludes Module 3, Lesson 11. Make sure you complete your problem set, your exit ticket. If you've got questions, make sure you reach out to your teacher and get some help.